The lights in the room weren't blinding, but they should have been. Maybe then I wouldn't have seen her. I walked in through the side door of the Roosevelt Art Pavilion, drawn by a name I wasn't sure I could resist. A friend had mentioned her keynote casually, unaware of what it meant to me. I told myself I was just curious, just passing through, just needing closure, but that was a lie. The truth was heavier. It clung to my shoulders like the wool coat I hadn't taken off. I was looking for her. Or maybe for proof that I had once mattered to her at all. And there she was. Sophia. Polished, iconic, effortlessly magnetic. Her voice filled the small expo room, silk over a blade. She stood under the soft amber glow of a spotlight that shimmered against her pearl white suit. Her smile held the kind of confidence I used to study in silence when we shared an apartment, a mattress on the floor, and dreams we couldn't quite afford. And when I wrote the first mission statement, she said, hand delicately on her, "Chess." I was still healing, still figuring out what survival meant. That's why I called it this tender place. A phrase I once scribbled in a letter to her, a name I whispered into the shape of her sleeping back one October night. She hadn't asked to use it. I froze, surrounded by applause. Around me, people nodded, some teary-eyed, phones up and recording. I wanted to scream, or run, or rip the mic from her perfectly manicured hand and shout, "That's mine," but I didn't. I stood still, she continued, her voice a pitch-perfect blend of vulnerability and grace. I remember sitting at 3 a.m., she said, writing an essay I wasn't sure I'd survive finishing. It was about reclaiming your voice, about how pain doesn't define us, it carves out space for something more. My throat clenched. Those were my words, word for word. I had written that in the dark, under the weight of grief and a broken family, with tears soaking the keys of my laptop. I had handed her that essay in trust, in love, and now she stood beneath a spotlight, turning my rawness into performance. I gripped the back of a folding chair, knuckles pale. The applause swelled again. Her photo was displayed behind her, artistic black and white, hair tousled, jawline sharp, eyes soft. Like a survivor, like someone who'd earned every ounce of praise. But I knew the truth. She hadn't survived what she claimed. I wasn't in any of the photos. Not in the timeline they projected. Not in the little video montage that played. After her speech, showing the journey of this tender place from concept to global grant recipient, I recognized the apartment in one shot, the chipped brick wall, the kirked lamp in the corner. That was my living room, our beginning. But I wasn't in the frame. It was like I'd been edited out of my own story. I stood in the back, a ghost no one saw, watching the version of my life she got rewarded for, watching her smile, bow slightly, and accept a glass award etched with the words, "Innovator in Queer Healing Spaces." I didn't hear the rest. My heart was pounding too loud. I turned and walked toward the exit, each step trembling but deliberate. The hallway outside felt colder, quieter, as if the walls had more empathy than the people inside. I leaned against the corridor, dizzy, not from seeing her, from being erased, because this wasn't about a broken heart anymore. It wasn't even about love. It was about the theft of identity, of voice, of pain turned into profit. And as her final applause echoed from inside the ballroom, I realized something brutal and clean. I'm the pain she built that brand on. I'm the silence behind her spotlight. I'm the story she sold. I stared down at my hands. They were shaking, but not with weakness. Something was waking up in me, a heat, a truth I had buried too long under the guise of forgiveness. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd stolen my voice, my origin, my name in the story, and maybe I couldn't change the applause. Not yet, but I could make sure she wouldn't get the final word. Because the thing about ghosts, We don't stay quiet forever. 4 years earlier, on a warm March evening that smelled faintly of jasmine and street tacos, I met Sophia in a second-floor studio with creaking floorboards and mismatched chairs. It was an LGBTQ plus writers workshop in Echo Park, hosted by a nonprofit that paid in coffee and validation. I almost didn't go, but I did. And that decision changed everything. Sophia introduced herself during the break. She wore a black turtleneck despite the heat, her sleeves pushed to her elbows, tattoos like poetry scattered across her arms. She had this way of speaking slow, deliberate, like every word came with an invitation to lean in closer. You're the one who read the piece about the voice in the attic, right? She asked me. I nodded, unsure how she even noticed. I'd mumbled my way through it. You write like you've been carrying silence in your bones for years, she said. It's beautiful. That was the first time anyone called my voice beautiful. And somehow she made me believe it. We started talking after the workshop ended. She walked me to my car. The city buzzed quietly around us, neon flickers, low laughter from bars, a siren in the distance that somehow made the moment feel even more intimate. From that night on, it was like gravity, not loud or crashing, just consistent, magnetic. She came over the next week with cheap red wine and a half-eaten notebook. We sat at my kitchen table, both of us barefoot, pages of our drafts spread between leftover Thai containers and wax candles, melted down to nubs. She spoke about ideas like they were people alive, hungry, waiting to be believed in. Let's start something, she said. Something real for women like us, something soft and sharp. We brainstormed a nonprofit support for queer storytellers, especially those silenced by religion or family. I had the bones of a plan, a name, even early designs. She added, flair, reach, presence. I called it This Tender Place. I love that, she whispered, her hand brushing mine as she wrote it in her sketchbook. It sounds like coming home. What I didn't say, what I should have, is that it was home. She was beginning to feel like home. At the time, I was barely holding myself together. My older brother had outed me to our conservative parents 6 months earlier. Their last words to me had been over the phone, crackling and stiff. We didn't raise you to live like this. The silence that followed was louder than any fight. I hadn't spoken to them since. I stopped eating full meals. I stopped submitting my work. But Sophia made me feel seen again. She'd sit with me on the floor and read my essays aloud, changing the inflection slightly, like tasting something new. You're quietly brilliant, she'd say. You don't need to shout. You just ... land. I fell in love with her voice first, then with her hands, then with how she laughed mid-sentence when she was excited, and how she always touched her collarbone when she got nervous. We kissed one night after she read a new essay of mine, one I'd written at 3 a.m. through tears and exhaustion. She finished reading, looked at me like I'd peeled the sky back, and said, "You don't even know what you're capable of." Then she leaned in, and I let her. It wasn't fireworks. It was a kind of remembering, like I'd been waiting for it for a while. It was good, fragile, but good. She stayed over more, called it our project. We pitched small grants, attended open mic nights, whispered about what the future could look like, but then the details began to shift. Subtle things. She suggested that maybe we shouldn't mention our relationship publicly. Not because she was ashamed, just optics, she said. People respond better when the brand feels universal, not personal. I swallowed my hurt and nodded. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I understood. Later, when we were preparing our first proposal, she asked if it would be okay to use her name alone. Just for this application, she promised. We need someone charismatic up front. You're the genius behind it. Everyone who matters will know that. My stomach twisted, but I agreed. because I loved her, because I trusted her, because I thought we were building something together. There was no paperwork, no contracts, just a shared Google Drive, my designs, her elevator pitches, late night emails with shared logins and hearts in the subject lines. I ignored my gut, ignored the ache in my chest when she started saying I instead of we during meetings, ignored the way she never quite answered when I asked about next steps. She still kissed my forehead, still read my drafts aloud in that voice I adored, still called me brilliant, even when her emails to sponsors didn't mention my name, and I clung to that brilliance. Because when your identity has been shaken, when your own family calls you a stranger, you'll hold tight to the people who see you, even if they see only what they can use. The night she said my voice was beautiful, I let her rewrite the boundaries of what I was worth. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of my erasure, not all at once, but softly, like water on stone. By the time fall turned the jacarandas brittle and bare, I'd already started to fade from Sophia's life, like pencil lines erased from a page that still held the ghost of handwriting. The breakup hadn't been loud. No shattered plates or slammed doors. Just a slow unraveling, one invisible thread at a time. It ended during a meeting with a potential donor we'd landed together, even though she walked in alone. When I suggested we revise the marketing copy to include both our voices, Sophia gave me that smile, the one that never reached her eyes anymore. You're being too sensitive, she said coolly. You just don't understand how branding works. We didn't speak much after that. A few dry texts, an unread draft I sent her. Then nothing. She ghosted, but her digital footprint grew louder. A few weeks later, she launched a campaign with a hauntingly familiar name. This tender place, healing through story, same mission, same target demographic, same tagline I'd once muttered while half asleep on her shoulder. But my name? Gone, nowhere on the site, not even in the fine print. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that the work still mattered, even if I didn't. That maybe, just maybe, she'd reach out and make it right. Apologize, thank me, fix it. Instead, she reached out for something else, my help. Hey, she wrote one day, casual and breezy, as if months of silence hadn't stretched. Between us, can you help with the back-end stuff again? I can't get the donation plug-in to work. You're always better at that tech side. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, like a fool, I said yes. I told myself it was for the cause. For the community. But really, I just wanted to feel nude again. So I logged into her website's admin panel. Late at night, after my own freelance work was done, no credit, no pay. Just me, the hum of my laptop, and a shrinking sense of self-worth. That night, the breaking point came quietly. No thunder, no scream. Just a single email notification I wasn't supposed to see. She'd forgotten to disable previews. I clicked. And without thinking, the subject line read, licensing confirmation, essay and personal bio for queer. Narrative docuseries. I opened it. The first thing I saw was the bio she submitted. Sophia James grew up in a conservative religious household, where coming out meant losing everything. My heart stopped. Those words were mine. That life, my life. She'd taken the story I'd spent years surviving and wrapped it around herself like a designer coat. It fit too well. Then I opened the attachment. It was the essay, my essay. The one I'd written after the night my parents cut me off after I stayed up shaking, pouring every ounce of heartbreak into a document titled Rewriting My Name. I had shown it to her once, printed it out, trembling, placed it in her hands. She read it aloud, said it was too sacred to publish. I believed her. Now it was stripped of my name, edited just enough to fit her rhythm. I read every word. I stopped breathing somewhere. In the second paragraph, by the time I reached the last line, I am not a survivor because I escaped. I am a survivor because I stayed myself. My vision was too blurred to continue. I closed the laptop, I stood up, and I vomited in the sink. It wasn't just plagiarism. It wasn't just identity theft. It was a burial. She had buried me beneath. Her performance of me. I collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing. Not delicate tears, not cinematic sadness. Ragged, gut-wrenching grief. The kind that leaves your throat raw, your muscles cramped, your sense of self split into before and after. I tried calling her. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. No reply. Of course, I didn't know what I expected. An apology, an admission. Maybe even God, how pathetic a promise to fix it. Instead, I got silence. And the sharp clarity that comes when silence becomes final. Around 3 a.m., I began packing. Her things. Not everything. We hadn't been together in months. But I still had pieces of her tucked into drawers, pinned to corkboards. A Polaroid of use at Venice Beach, a sweatshirt she left behind that smelled like bergamot and mint. And notebooks. So many notebooks we used to write side by side. Now they felt like relics from a faith I no longer followed. I placed them all in a box, one by one. Slowly, like a ritual, I found the letter I'd written her, the one with the phrase, "This tender place creased but still intact." I held it in my hands for a long time. There was a flicker in me then, not rage, not yet. Just a sharp, surgical grief. I thought about burning it all. Lighting a match, letting the smoke carry my heartbreak out the window and into the indifferent night. But I didn't. Not yet. Because some stories, no matter how painful, deserve to be witnessed before they are released. I taped the box shut and labeled it Truth Untold. Then I sat on the floor, holding my knees, as the sun crept up through the blinds, and for the first time in years, I no longer felt like I owed her anything. I left Los Angeles before dawn. No announcements, no goodbyes. Just one last look at the skyline through my rearview mirror, those glittering glass towers I once believed held dreams. Now they look like tombstones for the pieces of myself I had buried there. I drove north, past neon billboards and chain diners, through golden fields that gave way to pines. The further I went, the quieter everything became inside and out. By the time I reached the Oregon coast, the radio was just static. I kept it that way. It matched the silence I was learning to live with. I found a listing for a temporary job at a library in a town called Irondale, a place so small you could drive through it in 5 minutes. If you didn't blink. They needed someone to restock shelves, log new inventory, organize the donation closet. I said yes over the phone, my voice unfamiliar to even me. I rented a cabin just outside town. It stood near a cliffside where the ocean thrashed against rocks with the kind of honesty people in cities forgot how to give. The fog rolled in every morning like a blanket. It made the world softer. I needed self. The first few weeks, I did very little beyond exist. I slept, mostly. Ate when I remembered to. Read books I didn't finish. Drink tea that went cold. Wrote in my journal in half sentences and ink blots. The pain followed me, of course. That kind of pain doesn't ask for permission. It lived in the way I hesitated before introducing myself. In the way I flinched whenever someone said branding or voice or platform. In the way I still checked Sophia's name online, like pressing on a bruise. But slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice it at first. The ache began to soften. I started walking barefoot in the mornings. The dewy grass, cold and forgiving. I picked berries with a widow named Edna, who lived 2 cabins down and had a laugh like a rusted bell. She told me she'd once buried her wedding ring under a pear tree and never looked back. Pain, she said one morning as we plucked thimbleberries side by side, is just proof of passage. Like a stamp in your passport, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. I wrote more. Nothing polished, nothing grand. Just journal entries, half poems, lists of what I missed and what I didn't. I wrote about the color of Sophia's voice and how it could still haunt me. I wrote about that essay, the one she'd stolen, and what it really meant. I wrote about not being ready to forgive and not needing to. Some nights I walked to the edge of the cliff and read my words aloud to the wind. Once, a group of seagulls listened. I imagined they were critics, or angels, or simply echoes. Then came Ramona Dott. She owned the tiny bookstore on Main Street, Hollow and Hearth, where I wandered in one afternoon for tea and silence. She noticed my notebook, the way I clutched it like a shield. "You're right?" She asked, holding bookmarks shaped like pressed flowers. I hesitated, then nodded. She asked to read something. I refused at first, but the next time I came in, I left a few pages under her ceramic mug. When I returned, she said nothing, just handed me a sheet of paper with a note scribbled in turquoise ink. "Your voice makes people sit down and listen. You should let it speak." She gave me shelf space, just a small corner near the checkout where I placed a hand-bound zine made from photocopied pages and stitched string. I called it Tide Return. The next week, someone bought a copy. The week after that, someone left a sticky note inside. "Thank you for putting my silence into words." I stood in that bookstore, the salt air curling through the open window, and I cried in a way that didn't break me. Ramona hugged me once, awkwardly. She wasn't the hugging type, but I needed it. She smelled like sandalwood and dust. "You never needed her spotlight," she whispered. I looked at her, unsure what she meant. "You just needed your voice back." One morning, I stood barefoot in the grass outside my cabin. The sun was still low, casting a warm haze over the treetops. My mug was steaming. My hands no longer shook. I closed my eyes, and I realized something simple, something monumental. I had survived, not by burning it all down, not by proving anything to anyone, but by choosing myself. Every quiet, lonely, defiant day, there would still be pain. Still moments when her name curled like smoke in my chest. Still dreams where she apologized. Still seconds where I wondered what we could have been, but they no longer owned me. She no longer owned me, and for the first time in years, I began to wonder, not if I could take her down, but if I wanted to rise. It started with a bookstore corner and a stitched zine. It started with my voice, whispered into fog and stitched into paper, but the ripple traveled further than I imagined. Someone posted a photo of Tide Return on a queer literary blog. Someone else mentioned it in a thread about identity theft in publishing. And within weeks, my inbox filled with messages from strangers. I thought I was the only one. "She stole my story, 2 different names, same silence." "Thank you for saying what we're not allowed to." I was stunned. Not because people like my work, but because they heard it. Me, not her. Not the persona Sophia curated. Not the sleek Instagram captions. Me. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of being visible. Not for her shadow. Not for optics. Not for anyone else's comfort. So when the invitation arrived and offered to speak at a storytelling conference in Portland, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask anyone for permission. I packed a duffel bag, printed 3 copies of my new manuscript, and went. The conference was held in a reclaimed art school building, all exposed brick and creaky floorboards. It smelled like espresso, wood polish, and rain. My panel was titled "The Cost of Silence: Ethics in Ownership and Queer Narratives." I read aloud one of the essays Sophia had stolen, the original version with my name printed at the top in thick black ink. I told the audience how she'd once read it to me by candlelight and called it timeless. How she'd later stripped it bare and claimed it was hers. People didn't clap right away. They sat in silence, holding the weight. And then someone in the back, maybe 19, with pink buzzed hair and tears streaking down their cheeks, stood up and said, "That happened to me too." It wasn't validation I felt. It was a tether, a root, something anchoring me to a world I once thought I'd lost. I returned to Irondale changed. Not healed entirely, but solid. Settled. I began collecting proof, screenshots of her campaign pitches, archived web pages, audio clips where my metaphors spilled from her mouth, drafts she'd edited on our shared drive with metadata intact. Each piece I gathered wasn't for vengeance, it was for clarity. For truth. My cousin, nor sharp-tongued and Harvard-trained, offered to help. She'd worked in publishing law and immediately said, "She's not slick. She's just loud." She didn't push, didn't demand action. She just handed me a folder and said, "Whenever you're ready." Meanwhile, Sophia's career ballooned. A podcast interview where she quoted my essay word for word. A glossy magazine spread that titled her "The Queer South's Most Vital Voice." She wore vintage rings and quoted Audre Lorde with tearful precision. She was branded grief, polished to perfection, but cracks began to show. Online, anonymous users asked questions. Why does her work sound like 3 different people? Why are her essays oddly similar to the scene? Is she ever going to name her collaborators? She never addressed the comments directly, but I saw her tighten. In interviews, her warmth felt rehearsed, her pauses too measured. Her stories too clean. The tide, I realized, was turning. And then came the gala. Authentic storytelling in queer communities. A fundraising event. In Chicago, full of publishers, editors, artists, influencers. Sophia had top billing, keynote speaker. A week before the event, I received a forwarded email. The subject line: "We'd be honored to include your voice on the panel." They'd read "Tide Return." Wanted to hear my perspective. I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd. Yes, as a speaker, I booked a flight, polished my presentation, and printed my proof. Not to humiliate, not to scream, just to say, "This is mine," and let the silence that followed speak volumes. In the days leading up to the gala, I didn't sleep much, not because I doubted myself, but because my body remembered the nights I used to stay up helping her brainstorm. The way she'd drink tea and pace around my kitchen barefoot. How she once kissed me mid-sentence because I said the phrase "sacred." Estrangement, and it made her weep. I remembered all of it. Every laugh. Every betrayal. Every time I stayed quiet, but this time, I wouldn't be silent. The night of the gala, I wore a dark emerald blazer and silver earrings my mother once gave me before we stopped speaking. I braided my hair the way Sophia used to. Not for her. For me, because I'd always liked the weight of it. The venue was sleek, all polished marble and dim lighting. On the walls, projected quotes pulse like whispers. "Own your truth. We are the stories we tell." Visibility is power. When I stepped backstage, she was already there. Sophia turned slowly. Recognition flickered. Then calculation. Her smile was professional, not warm. "Didn't know you were on the roster," she said. I held her gaze. "Neither did you know I kept the drafts?" A flicker fear or fury crossed her face, but she recovered. She always did. "Well," she said, voice honeyed, "good luck up there." Then she turned, adjusted her blazer, and walked away. Didn't follow. I didn't need to. My panel came first. I stood beneath soft stage lights. The room was full. People murmured. Cameras flashed. I cleared my throat, then began. "My name is," and I said it. Fully, clearly. No edits. No initials. No apologies. I spoke about theft, not of objects, but of identity. How queer stories are often harvested by those who perform pain better than they process it. How love doesn't excuse erasure. How silence can be a slow death. Read one of the stolen essays. This time followed by the original metadata, the dates, the receipts, the names. No accusations. Just documentation. When I finished, people clapped. Slowly, then fiercely. I didn't look for her face in the crowd. I didn't need to. Later that night, someone slipped a note under my hotel door. It wasn't signed. She's terrified. She should be, but mostly she's ashamed. What you did tonight, you gave 100 of us our names back too. I cried, not the kind that made me curl into myself, the kind that washed something clean. The ballroom was a cathedral of chandeliers and curated light. Everything gleamed. The glasses, the silver, even the smiles. A pianist played something soft and elegant in the corner, and the air hummed with expensive perfume and muted ambition. Stood near the back at first, unseen, wrapped in the folds of a charcoal gray dress that felt like armor. My hair was pinned up, neat and deliberate. Around my neck hung a small locket containing the last Polaroid photo we ever took together, faded from time. But still real. Sophia was already on stage, radiant, effortless. She wore a pearl white blazer and glossy lipstick, the shade of forgiveness. She moved like someone who had never been questioned, who thought history could be rewritten as long as the font was pretty. Her voice filled the room like perfume. We carry our stories in the bones of our bodies, in the curve of a scar, in the silence after a door shuts. Tonight, I want to talk about healing. Applause, applause. Someone near me whispered her name like it was sacred. I watched without blinking. Every word she spoke, I knew. Not because I remembered it, but because I wrote it. She ended her speech with a smile that made cameras flash and editors nod. And then the moderator walked back on stage. A young man with a clipboard and a tremor in his voice. We actually have one more speaker tonight, he said. A surprise. One whose work you may not know, but whose words you've definitely heard. Pause. Please welcome Emma Caulfield. A hush. Then a murmur. I stepped onto the stage. My heels clicked across the polished floor like punctuation marks. In one hand, I held a printed photo, me and Sophia in our early days, sitting on a porch swing, 2 cups of coffee, one notebook between us. In the other hand, my original draft. Time-stamped, printed in full. I faced the crowd. Then turned to the screen behind me. I clicked the remote. The projector lit up. Essay, draft number 3. How We Name Pain, Emma Caulfield. Dated October 3rd, 2021. Time, 2:46. Amy began to speak. I'm not here to accuse, I said, my voice steady. Only to be seen. Some heads turned. Sophia's was among them. She and I once were close, too close for footnotes. We shared books, coffee, bedsheets, drafts. I didn't mind. Back then, I didn't need my name attached to everything. I touched. Laughter, soft and uncomfortable, scattered across the room. But this one was mine. It came from a night in Mississippi when my car broke down outside a diner. It came from the mouth of a woman who gave me shelter, and from the ache in my chest when I realized how many people's voices we mimic without credit. I turned the page. She published it in her memoir, called it an amalgamation, said it was based on unnamed sources. But I had a name. I have a name. I clicked again. The screen behind me changed. Side-by-side screenshots of her published paragraph and my original draft appeared. Same metaphors. Same rhythm, same story. Only now my name was visible. The room held its breath. I didn't shout. I didn't point fingers. I just reclaimed. I believe in shared storytelling. But I also believe in memory and justice, quiet justice. The kind that doesn't need blood, just light. My voice caught for a second. I let it. She told the world about trauma, about healing. But the voice she used to do it, it wasn't always hers. And then finally, I'm Emma Caulfield. I wrote that essay not for fame, but because I needed to make sense of grief. Tonight, I ask you not to cancel her. Just remember me too. I lowered the mic. The applause was unsure at first. A ripple, then a wave, then full-bodied sound. Some stood, some didn't, but I didn't look for her reaction. I wasn't here for her. When I left the stage, the air tasted different, like rain after smoke. I passed waiters with champagne trays and smiling strangers who squeezed my hand briefly. I nodded. But I didn't stop. She found me in the hallway. A quiet corridor lined with velvet wallpaper and gold-framed mirrors. Emma. I turned. Sophia looked smaller up close. The makeup didn't hide the sweat beating at her temple. I didn't know you were going to. She stopped herself. You blindsided me. I blinked. You stole from me. Not bitter, just true. She looked away. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I almost laughed. Intent doesn't erase impact. She stepped closer. You know, I loved. You right, that part was real. I met her eyes. And what about my name, my voice, my work? She said nothing. I pulled the Polaroid from my clutch and handed it to her. Remember this? I asked. She nodded. Tears clung to her lashes. You built your empire on a ghost, I said softly. I just came back to haunt it long enough to be seen. I left her standing there. That night, I opened the hotel window wide. The wind blew in like memory, cold and electric. I curled up on the bed with the zine in my lap, and for the first time in years, I slept, not restlessly. Not in pieces, fully. With my name intact.